Welcome to Career Cravings with your hosts, Dev Ramcharan and Megan Reed. If you crave a better and more satisfying career, this show is for you. We're broadcasting live on Bold Radio Station every week. Now, here are your hosts, Dev and Megan.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of Career Cravings. I'm Dr. Laura Hambley and we're broadcasting live from two locations tonight. My co-host Megan Reed is in Toronto and I'm filling in for Dev Ramcharan from Calgary. We're excited to have Michael Binion, who's also here in Calgary, on the show to share his inspiring career story. So thank you so much for joining us, Michael. To get us started, can you spend about 5 to 10 minutes telling us about your career and some of the highlights along the way?
Yeah, for sure. Well, recently I've had a chance in my most recent endeavors talking about oil and gas and Modern Miracle Network to go back to the very beginning, which is when I was a kid growing up in Alberta and being impacted by Trudeau-mania and Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who for all of his faults did some great things for Canadians, and I remember as a kid him making me feel like Canadians were great. Weren't just second class Americans, but actually maybe even were as good or better than Americans. But one of the key messages he had was that Canada, as part of being great, needed to stop being hewers of wood and drawers of water for our friends to the south, and that we need to stop relying on resources and oil and gas. And of course, at the same time, we had Peter Lougheed talking about the Heritage Trust Fund because Alberta was running out of oil, and we'd probably be out of oil within 20 years or so. And I really committed at that time that oil and gas was a so yesterday's industry, and this is in the 1960s and 70s, right? This is yesterday's industry, and I made a commitment then, even before I got to university, that I would never work in oil and gas, and that I would try to work in the new industries of high tech, et cetera. And a lot of it came out of that inspiration from Pierre Trudeau. And in fact, I did do that. I went in to become a chartered accountant with Clarkson Gordon, which is now Ernst & Young today. And from there, moved to Toronto after getting my CA, in part to move away from the oil and gas centric economy of Alberta, and was down there and became in tax, working for the high tech group, called Entrepreneurial Services Group. So I had clients like Spar Aerospace and high tech startups and so on and so forth. And did tax for also that accounting and accounting and tax has been a really important grounding, because you also get a fair bit of legal training in the tax as well. So has been a really important grounding to me. But I, over a little while working in tax, found that I was becoming, you started to become a specialist within a specialist. You weren't just a tax specialist. Pretty soon you were going to become a high tech or a real estate or a manufacturing tax specialist. And then the other thing that I found that bothered me about it, other than it became was continuing getting narrower and narrower, was that it seemed like a zero-sum game to me. That at the end of the day, my best accomplishments as a tax accountant were coming up with a plan to save one of my clients' tax money. But at the end of the day, all that meant was that the government had less revenue and had to get it from somewhere else. So the zero-sum game part of it bothered me because, of course, I was getting paid to do it, so it was even worse than a zero-sum game. You're being paid to just shuffle money from one pocket to another. And so I decided to leave that and went out and worked for the founder of Color Your World, and he had a little mini conglomerate of Nevada Bobs and real estate and golf courses, and I did that for 4 years during the 91 recession in Ontario, and the recession was very good training as well, how to survive when the debt's too high and the cash flow's too low. And so that's been also very important in my career, those survival skills during downturns. But I also learned how to build real estate, how to build golf courses, how to manage import-export, how to manage franchises. So I learned a lot doing that. And that would have been all fine, except that then we had kids, and family starts to become pretty important when you've got kids. And we said, well, maybe we should move back to Calgary, which we did. And of course, in Calgary, inevitably you become involved in oil and gas. I got into a couple of deals where there was different deals in there. The main deal I did was in real estate with Mogan Smed. It was probably my first deal that I did on my own, and which worked out really, really well. But there was also oil and gas deals in there, so pretty soon I found myself in that industry that I swore I'd never be in, and I've from there just ended up doing a whole series, probably a few dozen different high-tech oil and gas startups, both locally and internationally. And that's led me now to where I probably still do that to some extent, but having made a little bit of money, now I'm just as equally likely to do as a not-for-profit startup as a for-profit startup, because I find what draws me to them is more what I'm interested in, or what they're trying to accomplish in terms of trying to change the world or make things better. And sometimes not-for-profits have more interesting ideas about changing the world than for-profits. So I've ended up in a pretty good mix of both.
Great.
And that kind of brings me to today. So.
Great. And your main company is Questair Energy. Maybe tell us a little bit about how long that one's been going on and how much of your life that company occupies, Michael.
Well, that's a bit of an anomaly because, in startups, venture capital startups and turnarounds, and being with the high tech group with Ernst & Young, I was involved with a lot of high tech startups, but you're typically looking at business plans that are 3 to 5 years, that can sometimes take more, and in fact often can take more. Questair was a startup, and our idea there was to. I've been working in the former Soviet Union, and there the theme was looking really for easy oil, but in difficult places. And if you could learn to manage the politics and the politics there to make sure that your asset was secure and you could get cash out of the country, in theory the oil and gas or technical was a bit easier, and bigger fields with easier opportunities than you could find here. And so for me, that just meant traveling across the world a lot and having to drink with politicians a lot. So that got old after. It was pretty fun for a while. Met Edward Shevardnadze and some of the people that were at the head of the Ukrainian government, people at the head of the Georgian government. So very interesting, but double red eyes to Tbilisi, and spending a lot of time having dinners and drinking with people from that part of the world who can all drink a lot. It did get old after a while. And so I thought, well, what about the idea of taking that same business plan, but just make it backwards? Instead of easy oil in difficult places, let's look for very technically difficult oil and gas in an easy place, North America, where you're not worried about the politics. And so we started an exploration company, Questair, started around 2000, went public 2004, 2005, and our goal was to find a giant field by looking in new kinds of rock. So and what we ended up looking at was different reservoir ideas, one of which was naturally fractured shales. And then, of course, we all know what happened is that the technology also changed so that instead of naturally fractured shales, we could actually go into shale plays that we fracture them ourselves with the new technology. And we ended up actually discovering a giant field, which was, of course, the goal, in Quebec. And so, ironically, the idea of finding something technically difficult, well, that part certainly turned out to be true. But the idea of it being an easy place politically didn't turn out to be true. And we've been dealing with the environmental, social license issues really almost ever since we made the discovery.
Wow. That's quite a feat that you've had. And I guess I have a question, Michael, about how entrepreneurial you are. And I mean, there was obviously the turning point when you left tax and accounting as a full-time endeavor and started working on all these high-tech startups. And I'm wondering, how you first discovered you were an entrepreneur. Do you remember the defining moment of knowing that was the way you were headed?
Yeah. I don't really remember when that was, and I think it was quite a bit later. I was doing a talk. I was doing a talk somewhere where I felt it was important to distinguish between the difference of being entrepreneurial and being a small businessman, or being somebody who takes high risks. Like there's a lot of people in the financial markets. There's a lot of people who go to Las Vegas who take high risks, but it doesn't make them entrepreneurs, right? And I don't even remember when that was, but I know that's when it sort of tweaked me to try to define, why I found that the idea that this company or this person, or I guess probably this company, was a real entrepreneurial. Well, it's not really. They take risks and they're small business, but why do I not consider them entrepreneurial? And what I realized is that while they were a small business and while they took risks, they weren't really changing anything. They were doing what other people were doing. They just started their own business to do something similar. So they weren't really inventing a new. They weren't discovering something. They weren't inventing something. They weren't changing the way the world does things. And for me, if you're an entrepreneur, it's because you want to see something that you really think can be done differently. And by the way, that usually means you're a small business because it's brand new and often a startup. And it usually means you got to take a lot of risk because it's risky to do new things. And so I think a lot of times people have it backwards, that because entrepreneurs are usually small businesses and because entrepreneurs take a lot of risk, the opposite is not true. Just because you take risk doesn't make you an entrepreneur.
So I am really interested in your career story. I especially like the fact that you, Michael, thought early on in your life, and you can clearly remember the fact that you thought you will never work in the oil and gas world. And years later, it's where you've ended up. So I think it's really realistic and speaks to a lot of people out there that I've spoken to personally in the workplace and career field, because you've made a lot of changes and you didn't necessarily know where you were going to end up. And a lot of people assume that a career path should be really a straight line and you should know what you're heading for and just stick with it. And especially coming from that background of accounting, where it could be hypothetically a really linear type of career path, and it wasn't for you. You made a change. And so I guess I'm wondering, with the changes you've made, whether that be career changes, industry changes, how have you kind of managed your career? How have you known, or how have you made the decisions that you've made? When did you know something was the right change for you? Yeah.
Well, I know when I did the decision, what I would say is each decision to change gets easier. I would say that. You've just brought to mind that when I made the decision to leave the accounting firm, I just agonized over that. And I remember having to go for runs because of all the stress and not being able to sleep. And the trigger was what I'd said to you, was this sort of idea that you're not really contributing to society or making society a better place when all you're doing is charging a fee to move money from one pocket to another. And often I look at it, and a lot of these are people, good friends of mine, that what a shame it is in society that some of the brightest people in society are spending all of their talent on zero-sum game type of activities, usually managing the complexities of modern society for people, right? But it's all in the end not creating any value. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit of a shame in a way, and I understand that modern society is complicated, so some of that's necessary, but some of it feels like it's benefiting to complexify things just to try to make more money by helping people with it, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of changes, so making that change, one came from that thinking process of that I'm not actually going to ever make a net contribution to society sitting here as a tax accountant. And I apologize to all tax accountants. I use them myself today. They do provide useful services to me, so I just want to apologize to all of them who might be listening. But the other thing that happened there is we've done this strategic retreat, and in the CA firm, you talk about career paths. Well, it is all laid out for you in a CA firm. You start as a student, and then you become a CA, then you become a manager, then you become a partner, then you become a senior partner. Maybe you might become a managing partner, right? And as we were sitting in a strategic planning session, and I was listening to the partners talking with the managers, and at one point the partners were saying, well, they really need to think about this, right? And I thought, they said, well, just a second, I'm a manager, and we all say they should be thinking about fixing this because it's not working well. And, of course, that's the way people always talk, right? They should do something, right? But anyway, then I heard the partners say it, and they're going, they should. I said, well, but just a second, you're they, right? Mm-hmm. If when we say they should do something, we mean the partners, because aren't you in charge? And then I heard the people who I thought was in charge going, well, they should really fix this. And I'm going, well, at what point in time here will I get to the spot where I can say I'm going to do something? And so that probably was really the straw that broke the camel back, was to realize that the partners, the guys supposedly in charge, were saying they should fix it. This sort of idea that there's this impersonal they out there that's going to fix everything in our lives, right? So anyways, that was the other trigger that made me leave there. But to move out to a small business, it was a client involved in different things. I said retail and importing and franchises and real estate, et cetera. It was days of agonizing over it. And I remember talking to my dad, and he says, Mike, you just have to, if you've made up your mind, you just have to go try it. And if it doesn't work, then I guess you'll have to go try something else, right? And so I can certainly understand the angst people have. What I can say for sure at this point in my career, I don't, if I see something that I really think is good and I think can make a real difference, it doesn't take a lot of angst for me to do it because I've done it so many times.
So definitely, I think good information that it does get easier to make those changes over time, but it's really evident in, I guess, hearing you explain some of these changes is that you are a strategic thinker and you are very purpose focused. And I think that is a differentiating factor for you, because I've spoken in the practice that we have and on the show, we've spoken to other entrepreneurs, but I haven't had anybody frame it quite that way, with that zero-sum game and really wanting to make a net contribution to society. And I think it's funny because that sounds like something an accountant would say in a way. But
I have to say that even if my personality type is not perfect for being an accountant, I can tell you accounting skills are perfect for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and you really, and again, I even see that as strategic, moving entrepreneurial after you had that foundation of knowledge, like you said, on the tax side as well as the strictly accounting side. So, but again, I guess going back to that contribution that you want to make, because I don't think it was an insult to accountants out there. I think it's just a difference for you that you do want to make that net contribution. And so for you, is there a specific or particular way that you want to contribute or that you want to make a difference? Is it a specific thing, or is it just a contribution in general?
Yeah, what I would say, and some of this is backwards. If I keep doing this, it must be because I like it, right? Mm-hmm. And I can tell you one thing. I was in these startups all the time, and I get in the middle of these startups, and you're out of money, and like they say, doing a startup is like managing an insolvency every day, because startups never have any money, right? And no established revenue, et cetera. And so I kept saying, okay, well, when I get out of this deal, I'm never ever going to go back into this situation where I'm in a deal that's short of cash and at the edge, and you're trying to meet all these different challenges because it's all so stressful. And there I would be 3 years later, right back into another one, right? So then I finally realized, well, quit complaining about this, Michael, because the fact you keep doing it must mean you somehow like it, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of making a difference, I think we all look around us, and whether it's in our families, in our relationships, in our communities, and in our companies, in our country. I mean, many people, most of us at some shape or another, are all talking about how wouldn't it be better if, right? Wouldn't it be better if the government did this? Wouldn't it be better if the community were to organize this? And so, Mark Twain said about the weather, everybody talks about it, but nobody does anything about it. There's too many of us that sit and talk about how everything should be better, but they should do something about it. And so I guess I would say for me, making the world a better place is saying, here's something that's going wrong, and I'm going to do something about it, and I'm going to make it better. And it is those things that we all talk about all of our lives. And then, when do we ever do anything? My whole career has been about finding those things where I think I can do something and never saying they should do something.
Wow, that is really powerful, and I guess really brings home that point of what you were saying, one of those two factors with that meeting or that retreat with the partners where they were using that they should do this. And so you've actually taken it upon yourself to do this. And so I guess one other thing that I'm curious, and then I will turn it back over to Laura for the next question, is what was it that ultimately got you back into the oil or made you change into the oil and gas industry after that thought early on that you'd never go there? I see it as very, from what you explained, out of the box thinking, because you really looked at how things were being done and just reconceptualized it and did something completely unique. But what pulled you back towards oil and gas?
Well, it was a little public company deal that we took over the public company, and that public company was had been doing public venture capital, if you will. It probably had about 12 different investments, and they, none of them had done particularly well, and so the company was out of cash, but it had these investments, and there was one investment in there, movable partitions, which was the idea that the idea of it was, and I just been building strip plazas and so on and so forth, and it's amazing. Like every time you get a new tenant, you tear down all these good walls and you build all brand new walls, and it kind of feels very wasteful because sometimes tenants will change every 5 years or even 10 years. But even at the end of 10 years, the walls are still good. It's just they now have to be reconfigured, right? And every time you reconfigure it, you're doing tearing down construction, doing all new construction, and this company or of the group investment, the one they'd done had movable partitions where those walls actually clamped into the ceiling and the floor, and when you wanted to reconfigure, you unclamp them and move them instead of just reconstructing them, right?
Huh.
And so I thought, well, that's brilliant. That's a brilliant idea. Of course, these things are always harder in practice than they are in theory, but it's a brilliant idea. And so I was attracted to that deal and taking over that company for that one deal. But as it happened in those other 11 deals, there was a couple of oil and gas deals, which I then had to manage all 12 investments, not just the one that I came in for. By the way, the one I came in for was one I referred to earlier. It actually was built up with SMED Manufacturing as a partner and sold out to Haworth, which is a big international furniture company. And so it was actually it ended up being very successful. And a couple of the other investments did okay too. One of them being an international oil and gas exploration business, which I, then was, because of all the other investments, you're managing to get whatever money you can out of them, right? Anyways, so I got into that. I said, well, this is oil and gas, and you said you never do oil and gas, and because it's, it's sort of a dinosaur industry, blah, 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 right? And I talked to myself, well, yeah, but it's international, so it's really me taking Canadian technology to places like Turkey and Africa, and that's really kind of technology, actually. So I talked myself into it, rationalized my way into it on that basis, and that was my first oil and gas deal. But it then led to another, which was related to one of the other investments in there, and I met a guy in London, and so it ended up over in Ukraine and in Georgia, and this Tbilisi, Georgia, right after the Civil War. I mean, none of the lights worked, and the hotel lights worked based on generators. We're having drinks, and he's just saying, Michael, there is no more fun business than the oil and gas business, and we've got this great deal here, and you would be great for it, and you should really get involved in it, and you're wrong to think that it's not a good business. In fact, it's the most fun business. Anyways, he persuaded me. I took the job. I agreed to get more involved, I guess, and ultimately become an officer of it, and so on and so forth. And then just to fast forward, what I tell people now when I'm talking about that, hey, I had at the beginning of my career said I'd never worked in oil and gas. So, well, what's happened having got into it in the last 15 years is I've now realized So that whole idea of pure CO2, we got to stop being hewers of wood and drawers of water. And I thought, well, just a second. If you're the world's best at it, what's wrong with that? And so to me, it's the exact same thing you hear Justin Trudeau talking about. We should be known for our resourcefulness, not our resources. But there is no such thing as resources without resourcefulness. And anybody who's, I guess the one thing I would say, anybody who's listening to that basically same rhetoric of pure electricity in the 1960s and 1970s, well, it's quite apparent today that pure electricity was wrong then, right? It is just as true that Justin Trudeau is wrong now, and it's not so him in particular. Those people who somehow think that resources is yesterday's industry, what I've also found, oil and gas is more high tech. It's one of the most high tech businesses there is, and I get to deal in oil and gas with so many technologies. When you do a high tech startup, you're dealing with your technology. When you're in oil and gas, you're dealing with dozens of technologies. It's one of the most fascinating, interesting, fun businesses there is, and my friend did me a favor to convince me to get into it, all because in the end, hewers of wood, drawers of water is a pejorative for our industry, but we're higher tech than almost any industry in the country.
Great. So this is really interesting for our viewers because the energy industry is so often misunderstood. And I guess what type of career opportunities do you feel are up and coming within that industry? And what advice would you give people in taking the time to explore what that industry has to offer, Michael?
Right. Well, what I would say about oil and gas, if I were to look at it today compared to 1970s when I was making a decision, would I want to invest a career in oil and gas or not? First of all, I spent 15 odd years outside of the oil and gas business and was able to successfully transition into it. And I think you can spend 15 years in oil and gas and successfully transition out of it. I mean, one thing I would say is that I wouldn't believe anymore that just because you work in oil and gas that means you have to work there forever. So I think that's one thing, and I think that's true of any single decision you make. You don't have to do it forever. The other thing I would say is that the idea that one of the things that convinced me was the idea, well, Alberta's going to run out of oil. There'll be no industry left here, right? And even though we stop running, we always keep seeming to run into more resources. We don't seem to run out of them. People still talk about how we might run out, right? What I see is that the resources in the ground are well beyond many lifetimes for us to think that we're going to consider running out of them, if ever. But they all are getting more and more technically challenging to get out, which is why the industry has had to become so high tech to be able to get these resources out 3 and 4 kilometers under the ground out of very difficult rock. And if I was to look over the next 20 to 40 years of a career, I would expect the oil and gas industry to become even more high tech to continue to meet those technical challenges. And there's that saying that says the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of rock, and I'm absolutely convinced the hydrocarbon age won't end because we run out of oil and gas. It'll change because of other technologies. And the other thing is the people taught we don't really run out of oil. What we run out of is $20 oil. What we can say for sure is that during my career, we ran out of $20 oil. It's gone. There's no more $20 oil to be found in the world. But we've managed with technology to learn how to produce $50 oil, and there seems to be lots of it.
Great. Interesting. So maybe it would be interesting for the listeners to hear about your work with the Modern Miracle Network, just in a real quick summary, what that's all about, because I know that's a really important initiative for you.
Yeah. Well, it really came out because we made this big discovery in Quebec. And then I'm down there really naively thinking that people of Quebec are going, when the test results started to come in and I started to realize the scale and the scope of the discovery, I went, wow, this is huge. It's a huge discovery. And not only that, it's dry, sweet natural gas, doesn't need any processing, and it's right close to market, so it doesn't need any transportation. So the amount of energy and emissions to get this very dry, clean, like no no nitrous oxides, no sulfur dioxides, none of that in this gas. Very dry, clean natural gas, so very clean burning, and very low emissions involved in the processing and transportation of it. And you couldn't find anything better from an environmental or fiscal point of view for the province of Quebec. You couldn't objectively find anything better, and it was big. And so I'm kind of waiting for people to realize it, and I'm thinking there's going to be congratulations. Maybe they're going to have ceremonies for me, or who knows, right? But it didn't work out that way. Instead, we had protesters, driven sort of, I think, mostly from the Leave It in the Ground movement, who I don't think they care whether it was clean or not. They just are anti-hydrocarbons on purpose. And so I've been working for the last 5 years in Quebec to say, well, look, objectively speaking, these are the facts, and they may not be how you feel about it, but these are the facts. And so how do we have a conversation about this natural gas discovery and oil and gas period in Quebec? How do we have that discussion in a way where we actually are talking about the costs and benefits of all of our choices? So we refer to that as an adult conversation, as opposed to, well, we just don't like cowboys from Alberta, so we don't want your discovery. That kind of emotive thinking, right? And through that process, we've step by step, and by really stepping back, and instead of telling them all the facts and why can't you get educated and understand what I understand, really stepping back and start listening to them. Well, why do you feel the way you do? Why? I find in this area the most important question is not what do people believe, but why do they want to believe it? Why do people in Quebec want to believe that this gas discovery would be bad for them? Because all experience around the world and says it's going to be great for them. So through that whole process of thinking, and part of my background is I was chairman of the Canadian Taxpayers, so have been involved in political advocacy before this discovery, and using those, we spent 5 years, and we've successfully convinced Quebec to have a pro oil and gas policy, cautiously pro, but pro. And we've now also got a new hydrocarbon law passed. There's also a new environmental law passed, and step by step that we figured out what was the thing for Quebecers, and we went to them and said, well, they want to make sure that they feel they're doing the right thing environmentally. And so we said, okay, well, then if we're greener than green here in Quebec, and we feel very good about ourselves because we're so green and so conscious about the environment, if that's the case, why does Quebec have such a big hydrocarbon import problem? And it really turned the question around from not, let me give you all the facts and figures about my field, as to say, well, if you're greener than green, shouldn't we be having more windmills, and shouldn't we have more hydro and more solar, and to balance the energy diet, shouldn't we consider some local production if we really care about the environment? And that argument's carried the day, right? Or carrying the day, because the fight goes on. But it really led me to realize that in the rest of Canada, we've got the same debate going on with these Leave It in the Ground people who are comparing all the benefits of wind and solar, which I'm a proponent of. I think I'm for them, but they're comparing their benefits to all of the impacts of oil and gas. And of course, oil and gas does have impacts, but I don't care what it is. If all I know are the impacts of one thing and the benefits of another thing, the choice gets real easy. So Modern Miracle Network was really to say, there's nobody in English Canada doing that same debate that we've been doing for 5 years in Quebec on how do we have an adult conversation about our energy diet, what are the benefits and costs of every energy choice, and how do we best balance those choices, which to me is an adult conversation. That's how that's how you do most things in your life or in business, etc. So why wouldn't we do it as a society? But nobody, including all the oil and gas associations and companies in Alberta, was wanting to get into that very public debate. And so I started Modern Miracle Network to take that same debate that we've been having in Quebec to English Canada, to talk about the incredible benefits of oil and gas. And by the way, there are impacts from renewables, and we need to look at all of them.
Okay. And so I want to actually just extend on this a bit, the idea of that adult conversation and some of the political piece of your career a little bit, Michael, because we've hit on that entrepreneurial piece, but we haven't touched so much on leadership with you. So I'm wondering, in your case, I agree with you. I think these adult conversations are important, are necessary, and should be how everyone talks about things and really makes the decisions. It's clear you're a strategic thinker, but I'm wondering, in terms of leadership, what do you think you bring to the table? Do you do things differently? I'm not sure, but what is it that really, I guess, hits home in terms of strengths that you see in yourself as a leader?
Yeah. Well, I have random abstract thinking. If you do the Myers-Briggs and all that sort of stuff, I come up as ENTP, which is the classic entrepreneurial personality. So partly what I bring, I think, is a natural skill of being able to look at situations and quickly see what's the most important things, and then focus on those things, but also quickly see, what could be improved on this, right? Where could there be a change made? In fact, one thing I've had to learn in my career is once I get things running well, I better get away from it, because I'm so oriented to want to make things better. I'll take something running well and turn it into a crisis just so I can fix it. So I have to watch that in myself. But so I guess it would mean that my leadership skills are probably best for when there's a crisis. So that's where the startups and turnarounds has probably been a natural place for me, because startups and turnarounds are places where people need people. You need to be able to very quickly to figure out what's most important, be able to make a reasonably quick decision, be confident about your decision, and also be willing to change it quickly if it turns out to be a wrong one. And that most people not that comfortable with that. Most people want to feel they've thought through all the possibilities and issues and want to make a decision, and then having a decision typically don't like to have to change their mind, right? So I'm the opposite of that, or different than that. So I think that's one leadership skill I bring to situations where there's a bit of a crisis and everybody's looking, what should we do? I'm usually confident and have an idea to very quickly say, this is what we need to do, and it's all going to work out. And by the way, if we make a mistake, we're going to be able to fix it, and we're going to be able to succeed with however we fix it. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is, I've really got the courage of my convictions. So when I believe in something, I'm all in on it, and I think that's another thing people need to know, is that they're behind a leader who really believes in what they're doing and is believing what they're doing, for the good of the group, not to lead that group to somewhere better than the crisis they're in, right? So I think those are probably the two main things: courage of convictions and willingness to make decisions.
Mm-hmm. Well, that resonates with me because I am an ENTP also, so it excites me to hear that you are, because I'm like, oh, maybe I can get there one day. But I hear you in terms of seeing the big picture and being able to analyze and critique and have questions, pull out that information really quickly. And I also think it's important for the listeners to hear, and just a strength that you have as well, to know where your strengths are and where the weaknesses are. Like you said, once you've got it up and running, it's best to step out now and have someone else step into place. So on that note of kind of analyzing, I guess, not necessarily where your weaknesses are, but I'm curious, with everything that you've learned across your career, all the changes you've made, you have such a wealth of knowledge. So I'm wondering, with all of that knowledge, if you were able to somehow go back and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell your 18-year-old self, knowing what you know now?
Gosh, isn't that they make movies about being able to do things like that, don't they?
Yes. Maybe one day you'll invent it.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that when I was the personality that I just talked about, being able to size things up quickly, and being able to and be able to come to a decision, and have the courage of your convictions is something that requires a certain amount of investment in yourself and also a certain amount of experience. I mean, it's not like I was 18 years old and could go into a business decision and have any confidence whatsoever that I knew what to do, right? And so during those early parts of my career, if I'm highly confident now, I was probably underconfident then. And I guess the one thing I would tell my 18-year-old self is that you probably knew more than you thought, and more to the point, other people probably knew less than they seemed to know, right? So probably could have been more confident then. And I also, especially at 18, I could have been a lot more engaged. I wasn't really engaged. I was getting by, and I was lucky. I could skip my classes at university and not really do my studying and still get good marks, right? So, and same thing in high school. So it was a shame not to have used those years to take that extra bandwidth and capacity and used it to learn more stuff that I spent time learning on my own in later years. So I guess mostly I would say to be more confident, to realize that everybody portrays and acts like they know, but they've all got insecurities too, just like you do. They're just, nobody likes to show them, and to be more confident, and also to be more engaged, and to invest more in myself younger.
Right, and I think that's great advice, Michael, for people to never take for granted the opportunity they have to learn and grow. And I think sometimes when people are younger, they totally take that for granted. So excellent for our listeners to hear. So stepping ahead to the future, I'm curious how you look at retirement, because I can't imagine you retiring given your level of passion. But what things do you want to accomplish between now and when you retire from the world of work, and what does that phase of your life look like for you?
Well, I know for sure I have a house in Phoenix that my wife and I like a lot, and we like to golf there. I've recently got into a lifestyle investment in terms of heli skiing and trophy trout fishing up in the Caribou Mountains in BC, and which is a bit of a, yes, it's a lifestyle investment. It's more, it's a business, but it's also a personal property, and we have a place in Kelowna for the summers on the lake. So these are all places I really like to be. So for sure, it would be nice to see my life gravitate to have more time to spend in those places that I really enjoy. The real question is like, how do you get there from here? Because I'm immersed in a lot of things that I really love to do here. This Modern Miracle Network was a brand new initiative, which I really love and is quite time consuming. And I have a company to run, which is time consuming. So these things just all a question of trying to find that balance. But for sure, retirement for me probably looks more like a phasing out than you retire on this day, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what are you most excited about accomplishing between now and then? Like, what type of legacy do you want to leave, Michael?
I want to say that, I'd like to be able to say that I was one of the very few people in oil and gas history who found a giant field and got it on production. I thought, I have to admit, when I first started doing it, I thought finding it was the hard part. I've been quite nonplussed to find out that producing it turns out to be even harder. But that to me would be a major career achievement that very few people in the history of oil and gas have been able to do. So that's a big thing. And by the way, in the process, change the politics of Quebec. I think changing the relationship of Quebec to hydrocarbons will change the relationship to Alberta, which will change the politics of the whole country. So I think it's not just having found a giant field, because I love science, right? And it's one of the reasons I like high tech. So I've published a peer-reviewed paper in marine petroleum geology, even though I'm not a geologist, but I have done it, and that's a great geology success to found the field. But to change the politics of Canada in a way that I think is very positive, is another huge accomplishment. And then if that leads into changing the Canadian narrative for people to be able to be openly proud of being the best in the world at hewing wood and drawing water.
Wow. So really, again, I think the title of this show, Changing the World One Cause at a Time, is perfect. And I think really with what you've said, impacting Canada on a national level is really that legacy that you want to leave behind. And I think that's amazing and inspiring for people out there listening, because like you said, sometimes people talk about these things and they talk about it, but they don't actually take the steps to do it. And I think your career has been a great example of how you have taken steps of continual growth to really continually get closer and closer to that point of that large scale impact. And obviously you have made large impacts in your career already, but there's more to come. And so I guess just kind of tying things together with that end of career stage that you will get to one day. If you do ever fully retire, I'm not sure, like you said, it'll probably be more of a phasing out for you. I'm wondering, what would you, on a personal level, the personal legacy, I guess, what would you want to hear people say about you? If you were to have a retirement party, somebody got up and had that speech, what would you want them to say about you?
Yeah, well, I'd like my kids to be able to be really. My kids are 27, 29, and I've actually mixed family of 5 now. I've actually got 5 kids between 20, 23, and 31. And I think the most important thing is that you have that your family be proud of their dad, but just as much as I want to be proud of them, right? So I think that would be the number one thing. One of the things when you get into the kind of advocacy politics that I'm in, part of it, you have to have a certain party that doesn't really care what people think, because if you did, you wouldn't out there listening, having Greenpeace and Devoir and all these other people attack you and criticize you. So what I want people to say, anyways, if people said that I've made a difference in their lives, I think that would be it. Somehow something that I did made a difference in their lives, and that they saw that difference was positive for them. That would be a great thing to know.
Great. Well, perfectly put, Michael. And we could go on for another hour. I mean, your career was so interesting that I have a lot more questions, but we're going to have to go to the next segment of our show. And we really appreciate you joining us tonight, Michael, and speaking so eloquently and in an inspiring way for our listeners. I think we've all learned a lot from what you've shared with us. And with that, we'll move to the second segment of our show, where Megan and I will sum up the key themes and nuggets that we've heard from your fascinating career, Michael. So thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for thinking of inviting me. That's very, very, very complimentary, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we've just heard from Michael Binion, and what a career story. Really fascinating and interesting from a personal point of view, and I'm sure for our listeners as well. I guess really it was clear that Michael is a really passionate entrepreneur and leader. He really believes in the work that he does. He wants to make that large-scale impact and that change, and that's what he's worked towards over his career. And I think for people out there listening, I hit on this earlier in the show, but I think it's such a great message that when he was young, he didn't know exactly where he was going to end up, what exactly he was going to do. He was strategic along the way. He made his own opportunities, and he took opportunities, chose the ones that he thought were best suited to align with really the long-term goal. And so that, I think, is a great message and piece of information to the listeners out there, to have that goal of what do you want to do? And in Michael's case, it is that big-scale impact. Whether your goal is similar to his, really on that large scale, or it's something smaller, be clear about what your goal is. And so you can be more cognizant and strategic, like Michael was, around choosing opportunities that fit or are in line with that long-term goal. And you heard early in his career when he was working in the accounting firm, and he had a high level of power responsibility there. It just didn't hit the mark for him in terms of aligning with that long-term vision, goal, legacy that he wanted to leave. And so he made a change. And it's not to say those changes are easy. It's clear that Michael has that element of risk-taking, but it did seem from the story that he shared to be strategic. He's a critical thinker. He analyzes the options before he just moves forward. So he's a risk taker, but it's not just about taking risk. It's that strategy piece that's built in there as well. He also has a wide variety and breadth, I think, in the interests that he does have, because he has that financial background, but then he's used that in so many different industries, real estate, oil and gas, like he said, kind of these personal endeavors more recently with heli skiing. So I think it's interesting, too, how he's been able to use his skill set, use his strengths to kind of cover all this ground in all these different ways. And so, again, to think to yourself, how can I apply that learning, that method, that mentality into my own career, into my own life? Because Michael is so passionate, and it's clear that he loves what he does. And that's why he loves what he does, because he's been able to incorporate all of these different elements, the variety, but also capitalizing on his strengths and his passions and what's important to him. And so what I think the clear message is he's been really honest with himself in knowing what he needs and finding ways to make that work throughout his career. There was also a big element, I think, of growth and being growth focused. That's definitely something I would pull out from Michael's story, because, again, some people are really, they really enjoy maybe building a skill set and just honing that skill set in one specific area. And that's not necessarily the case for Michael. Like he said, he's learned a lot throughout his career. If he were to go back and talk to his younger self, he would have said, learn more at that time and don't just float by. Get involved, be engaged, and use every opportunity to the fullest. And again, I think that is great advice for our younger listeners out there, the ones who are in high school or in university. Get engaged, be involved. What are you interested in? Choose a cause, a club, a group, a sport, something that speaks to you, and consider what can you get out of that opportunity? What does it provide you with? And whatever it provides you with, does that align with something future focused that would be what you want? The other thing, I guess, hitting on that same point, and Michael said this one loud and clear, is you don't have to do it forever. So you can always make a change. If you aren't happy, if it isn't a fit, if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't make sense, make a change. And I know that a lot of people would say, well, Michael has this uber successful career. Of course he can just make changes. And I would say change is always an option. It doesn't mean change is easy, but be strategic and figure out how you can do things that are going to be beneficial for your life and for where you want to be and who you want to be. Be truthful to yourself about that in the way Michael has, because again, you look at his story, you look at where he is in his life, and he's a happy guy, he's fulfilled, and he gets to use his skill set to really do the things he believes in. So I think, yeah, that purpose-focused piece stood out loud and clear for me. The passion, the strategic thinking, those would really be, I guess, the key elements that I would pull out from Michael's story and how I would speak those forward to you to consider in your own life. So that would be my thinking. Laura, what did you hear from Michael? What would you want to share with the listeners, and what would you have pulled from what he shared?
Wow, you said it so well, Megan. You took a lot of my points, but I definitely have more to add, because I think that there's just so many positive strengths that came through. So just summing up what I saw as Michael's strengths, definitely his strong self-insight. I think that he really knows himself and his strengths and weaknesses. He even knew his personality type on the Myers-Briggs. I thought that was really great to be so self-aware. And I think that he understands that he likes dealing with change and opportunity. He's really good at handling crises. He likes to really make a difference. And he doesn't find basically running or managing something as interesting, right? He wants to deal with the new and the exciting and then leave it to someone else to run. So he has that self-insight. He's a quick thinker. He's willing to make decisions, and he's not the type of person who gets stuck in analysis paralysis. So he's willing to take those risks. But I thought it was really interesting how he said being an entrepreneur is, if you're a risk taker, it doesn't necessarily mean you're an entrepreneur. I think that he's an entrepreneurial type of risk taker who is willing to jump into things. He does a quick analysis. He obviously is very strategic, but he believes in what he's doing and he sees the big picture. He likes to critique and size things up quickly. And I think his engagement and passion, I would use the word passion and confidence, really shone through in this interview. And I'll just be really excited to continue following his Modern Miracle Network and his company and all the other nonprofit work that he's doing that we didn't have too much of a chance to get into. But Michael had said that he really wants to continue making a difference in the world. And sometimes it's the nonprofits that are the best way to do that. And I can see Michael getting more and more involved in that side of things. And I really liked the zero-sum game analogy that he used, and about making a net contribution to society in whichever way he can, whether it's bringing fuel and energy to basically run our cities, whether it's bringing joy to people experiencing his ski and heli lodge, whether it's the nonprofit work he does with children's initiatives and other things that we didn't have a chance to touch on today. And I think that his work in Quebec is absolutely outstanding, and it really shows a tenacity and a courage. I think courage is a big theme here, because to be in a career where there's so much working against you, hurdle after hurdle, and to be slaughtered by the media and slaughtered by the general public, yet to continue persisting to do the right things, to do it the right way, to find energy that is as environmentally friendly as possible, and to educate people by having adult, respectful conversations is just a wonderful way to do it. And I think Michael really exemplifies that. And I found it really inspirational to listen to his story, and I have no doubt that he'll continue making the world a better place, one initiative, one business, one idea, one non-for-profit at a time. So those are my thoughts. I could go on and on, but we're almost out of time here. And again, I would like to really thank Michael for joining us tonight. And basically, I want to say if anyone has any questions or comments about tonight's episode, let us know through our Canada Career Counseling website, Twitter, or Facebook page. We're always looking for dialogue around these topics and for new guests and ideas. So if there are careers out there that you've been craving more information about, please let us know. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. And I hope you all have a happy Monday tomorrow, and we'll be back for more Career Cravings next Sunday.
The career discussion doesn't stop here. For more information about how to transform your career, visit CanadaCareerCounseling.com. And remember to tune in next Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Bold Radio Station for the next episode of Career Cravings.